Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this session on business rescue. What I want to do today is to just look at where business rescue came from. And that is really found in the world of turnaround. So business rescue, while we see it as new in South Africa, it's not really new. It has been done under business rescue, under turnaround for many years. So there are certain principles that we have to understand. And this is what I want to present to you today. So what I call the basic recovery thinking procedure. There are certain basics that must be in place and that people pursue in the processes of turning around a business. So it often starts when a business is in financial distress or things are not going as well as it should be in the business, and then either the owner of the business, if they have the capacity to do so, or else maybe a consultant comes in and they go through a thinking procedure. There's some procedure behind it, and that's what I want to focus on then today. So the first step is that once you go into this business, you have to make a diagnosis. And for that, we use certain tools, as we will do along the line. I will also present to you certain shorter videos on the fire assessment, for example, how to do an opportunity analysis, and to evaluate the reasonable prospect. Reasonable prospect has become a very important word in the world of business rescue. And we are going to expand that to some extent. So the initial thing that you must do is like a diagnostic. And that helps you to determine whether you are going to pursue an informal process or a formal process, where we say the formal process in our context is business rescue. Informal gives us many other options, but it does not necessarily give us the protection that we would have under business rescue. So it's very important then to make that early choice. So once you have done that, you must make a decision, an intervention decision. Are you going to intervene in this business? And if you are going, what is the options that you have available to pursue? So the intervention decision will depend on several things. Whether the core for a business exists, do we really have a business, or do we just have a number of elements but it's not really a business? And as we will do under the separate CD later for do we have a business, we will expand on those elements. Also included must be the management that is existing in that business. Do they have the capacity? And we know that businesses land in trouble as much as 85% of the time because of poor management. Okay, so that is a given. And we will have to explore that and consider that big time. And then finally, you have to make a quick decision on the fund situation. And that we will again explore under the reasonable prospect. So I'm just starting here to say to you, here is a process. We must make a diagnosis, make a choice. Are we going informal or formal? And that will depend on this intervention decision. Now, the one thing that we always want to do is save the business, or reorganize the business, or restructure the business so that it can go on. And then if we cannot do that, we pursue other alternatives. So the first thing that we then say, let us assume that we have made this intervention decision, and we say that we are going to reorganize the business. So then, when you come into this business, the first thing is then to stabilize the business, which is generally known in turnaround fraternity as stop the bleeding. So there are 2 points. The one is the first creditors meeting, where you have to go to, in business rescue, to the creditors and say, I believe that I can save this business, if you are the business rescue practitioner. But it's the same in turnaround. You have to make that decision, and if you pursue this route, you have to stabilize the business, and that is mostly about costs and cash flow, as you will see in the next slide. So the principle is stop the bleeding. While you do that, you must confirm the fund situation. Initially, when we did the intervention decision, we looked at the basics and say, well, is it illiquid? Is it insolvent? What is the status of the business? But here we confirm the detail of the fund situation. So it is a more advanced analysis. Sometimes one can call it a feasibility, because that is one of the things that, for example, the rescue practitioner must also do. Once we have stabilized the business, the operations, the funds, and stop the bleeding, so in order to eventually save the business, this is a crucial step, we have to check the fund situation. So the fund situation is more an in-depth study, a more feasibility study, much more detailed than the one that we have spoken about when we made the intervention decision at the earlier stage, before we took the decision. After confirming the fund situation, and we see that funds can be generated, can be accessed, maybe, we have to then start with the formal process. Mostly turnarounds are based on retrenchment. Okay. In South Africa, retrenchment unfortunately has a very negative connotation. But the meaning of retrenchment in turnaround is a general reduction in all costs and expenses that the business has. It's not only the retrenchment of people, it's a general term for retrenchment. And while you are going through that retrenchment, which is very much associated with a stabilization process, we also then do a proper strategic analysis in order to understand what are the key issues involved in this business. And you will see those things relate to the instructions that the Act gives to the business rescue practitioner to do anyway. In that process, we also then look for causality. And there will also be a separate section on causality. Because if you cannot understand exactly what caused the decline in the business, you cannot address it. Because there are different things that can be associated with a financial distress in a business. For example, it can be operational issues, or it can be, again, strategic issues, maybe a general decline in the industry, and so forth and so forth. Okay, so we will expand that also at a later extent. Because your recovery choices that you make, the next one there, the decisions will be based on what exactly the causality for the decline is. Then we can make the restructuring decisions, which is then normally put into the rescue plan. That would be the general process if we pursue this route. During this process, there are certain principles, which we would call recovery or turnaround principles. Those principles are quite important because they would be very general over all the cases. They would be part of the thinking. And those would involve things like the management. You have to investigate the management and address the management problems, because we know we have already mentioned up to 85%. Secondly, cost and cash control, again associated with the stabilization as well as the retrenchment portions in that ladder that goes up there. You have to find out what is the core of this business. What exactly must be focused on. So the core has to do with priorities, that is general strategic thinking when you make sense of the business. And then you have to develop what we would say a real strategy. And the strategies are many or they can be few. But they have to do with the initiatives that you will take, which will then of course be in the rescue plan. The next thing is speed. And speed is important because the one thing that you do not have in a turnaround is time. So things must happen quickly. Every single day that the turnaround goes on, there's often more costs flowing out of the business. And then it's also important that you time things correctly. When you do something is very important in a turnaround. So we have those 5 principles. And they will manifest, as you will see there, depending on the difficulty of the turnaround. If that line is more steep, it's a more difficult turnaround. And the chances of success might be less. So those principles will manifest and combine differently for each and individual one, which will then determine the actions that you follow. Okay, so this is the first option. If we say we are going to pursue a restructuring, then all of this must happen. If we see at the intervention decision, however, that that cannot happen, there are 2 other options that we can pursue. And the first one is what we call the BRIL option, which is an acronym for better return than in liquidation. BRIL, better return than in liquidation. And this is an option that the Act provides for us, as it states that if you cannot reorganize the business as a going concern, then this will be an alternative that you can pursue. And we will investigate that maybe in a later discussion. The third option is other strategies. If we say, look, we do not have funds, there is no management, we do not, operations is stopped, we might consider other alternatives. For example, liquidation, if we cannot get a better return than in liquidation. But there are maybe 2 others that I just want to point out. One is the sale of the business. You can sell it to somebody else who might operate this business because they have another set of resources. We can also do a defensive merger, so meaning to join up with another business to defend the existing business. Just for a moment, think about why are we talking about business rescue? Underlying business rescue is to protect employment and business, the economy in itself. And if we can do that through a defensive merger, for example, that is another possibility. Maybe also included there might be Section 155 compromises, which may fall under BRIL, but it may also fall under other strategies. Okay, so we have the 3 options. One, we can try to reorganize the business, depending on what happened in our thinking so far. Alternatively, we can go for BRIL, or maybe any one of the other alternatives. So the next thing that I'm going to discuss will be in the following video that we make. Will be then the causality. We are going to address the green block there, about the identification of the core causes and issues before we can start with the recovery. So to confirm them. Let us then see each other at that point.